obviously we're going to have to do a better job of arranging chairs. So stay with us. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. I really ask for new members and new folks here, but there's such a large crowd. I'm going to bypass that for right now. So welcome everyone. Give yourself a hand. Carl?
We're going to turn
He doesn't want to sit. Okay. For 50 years, we operated without a home, without operating out of borrowed space, and did some marvelous things, but we really needed a place to be. And so after many difficult searches and lots of wringing of hands and disagreements, we decided on this location. And so it's been very good to us. It's very centrally located. We're only 2 miles from Boonton with lots of canal features there. And we were a little bit worried about this being a modern building, which is not really quite what we all had in mind. But now that we're here, we're loving it. And what I hear from you folks, you're enjoying it as well. And so we're looking forward to using it and using it well. As you saw, our archive is growing, and we've now got space to actually do something with it. All those collections were jammed into two storage units, and nobody could actually use them at all. And now we've got a place to work, place to make things happen. And John Prytow, where's John? There he is back there, our archivist who's making it happen, working very, very hard to 50 years worth of collections, organized and online and searchable, and making wonderful progress. So stay tuned. And as I said, lots and lots of stuff is going to be online, and he's making that happen. So thank you, John. And sitting right next to him is Janice, who was our office managers. She is the lady that made this happen. 16 places we looked at all over Morris County, searching for exactly the right combination of location and price and build outs or not build outs. So we finally, one of the reasons we chose this place, it didn't need anything. It was like move in, a room for the archive, a room for the office. They had to change the locks and we were here. So right on. So stay tuned for more stuff as we begin to grow and be able to work on lots of new projects. So I'm just looking to see up on some of the things I say. We just sent out an annual appeal in November, and thank you all so much for your generous donations. We really appreciate it. Those donations will go a long way to working on some of the many projects that we've got in store for this year. A few of you put on those donations that you wanted to include your membership in addition to what you sent us. And if that was in fact the truth, and you've got a membership renewal in the mail, just give me a call and we'll straighten that out.
Okay.
Please have a seat, Mr. Bodenstein. Nice to have you here.
I think this one open?
Yes, it is. Bob Goller's long-anticipated book, Disappearing Act, the story of the abandonment of the Morris Canal, is almost ready to go to the printer. There is a copy of it on display in the office space, and with a sign-up sheet next to it. There will be a 100-book press run initially. Please, if you'd like a copy, put your name down. We don't have the selling price yet, but you don't have to commit to buy. But if you're interested, please let us know. Put your name down. So much for my carefully prepared notes. One of the important things that we need is volunteers. We appreciate your donations. We appreciate your memberships. We really appreciate your memberships. We need people to help us out with the many, many things that we do. Besides having an office, we do our programming at Waterloo every year, and that's going to be even more exciting this year. Our Waterloo Canal Day is going to be a partnership with Byram. Thank you, Frank. I'm getting old. Byram Township, and it's going to be a much larger, much more exciting event, and we're really looking forward to that. You'll hear more about that as the plans come together. We are at many other public events, and we're looking forward to hopefully being able to partner with Borough of Wharton to bring the lock site to same kind of programming again. How many folks got their newsletters? Great. Okay. We wanted to overwhelm you with a really neat. So you've read some of the stories. You read how the lock project is going. You've read about us unearthing sleeper stones in Booton. These are all the kinds of things that we're doing, and we need more people to help us. So Bobby Egan, where are you? There she is. Stand up so everybody can see our volunteer coordinator. Talk to this lady. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to play canal with us. We do all kinds of things. If you like to talk to people, we got loads of people for you to talk to. If you like to do archives, John would love to have help in the archives. There's all kinds of interesting things that we need help doing. Please join us. Okay, enough of listening to me. Clifford, we have a wonderful presentation for you tonight, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Clifford.
Hold on.
Yes.
So we have to make sure we're visible. Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm very pleased to be here. This is 1898 watercolor drawing, and the original is in the State Museum. It's the Roebling Works in Trenton with the D&R Canal in the front. And I have a copy for the Canal Society.
Thank you. Awesome. That is marvelous.
You're welcome. I see you have many wonderful illustrations, so I think this would be.
This will be, we do not have one of these.
Very good.
So thank you.
Very good.
Sometimes it's hard to find we don't have, but it's always a great possibility. Every day, something new shows up. And
Okay.
this is a great, thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, so shameless commerce. I wrote a book about the Roeblings called The Roebling Legacy, and I brought a couple of copies if anybody's interested, because we're going to see a number of Roebling things here. So this is a very interesting illustration because I'm fascinated how the artist could do this with such quality. I've looked at a lot of historic Roebling photographs of these buildings, and the accuracy in this drawing in terms of the windows and the perspective is really, really quite marvelous. And I'm wondering if these kind of bird's eyes were done by people going up in a stationary balloon and doing some kind of sketching, if that's the way they did it, and then came back and filled in all the details, because it's really marvelous how accurate this is. This is the house, but by the way, this is 1898. This is the house that John Roebling built. For people that know the geography of Trenton, this is Chambersburg, and this is going north up towards State Street on the canal, and this goes down to Bordentown.
Try to speak a little bit louder so that I can hear.
Okay, I'll hold it a little closer. Is that good? Somebody said dim the lights, if that's possible. So all the black,
Oh, that's nice.
all the black chimneys, all the black smoke coming out. Look at that.
Prosperity.
Prosperity, all coal fired. Over here, we got coal brought by the railroad. All the white puffs are excess steam being let off because they're producing steam all the time. And if they're not using it to run all the machinery, if one line goes down, they have too much steam, so they have to let it out. So think of all the energy being lost from all that steam going out. Later on, we'll see that all these chimneys and all the steam equipment gets replaced by one central boiler when the Roebling Company converts to electricity. And in those days, you couldn't, when you wanted to convert, there was no such thing as public service. You had to your own dynamos, as they called them, your own generators. And so you had your own single steam engine powering your dynamos, and they ran the whole plant on that. A vast increase in efficiency. So this is just at a very interesting time. Over here, we have an electric trolley. The Trenton trolleys, the Trenton Horse Railway was started in 1869, and the first trolleys were electrified around 1895. So just 3 years before that, electric trolley. Over here, we have steam locomotives. We have steam canal boats. And over here, we have horses loading wire rope reels onto canal boats with these booms, these derrick booms. Now, I'm not sure if these booms are actually, if they were the artist's idea, because I haven't seen these in any other illustrations. And maybe the artists had an idea to put them right in front of the Roebling site. So this gives you an idea of the power of the Roebling enterprise. It more than doubled in scale within a few years. How do I do this? Is this on? Can I just do it this way?
You can advance it now. Screen that's there.
So how do we do it on here? Page down. There we go.
This is actually working there.
Now it's working. Okay. So the D&R Canal. A woman named Sonia Kirilluk wrote her master's thesis on the geography in 1859. And she said something that several other people have said, including Bill. And I should have mentioned Bill at the beginning, that anybody doing any research on the canal is beholden to Bill for all the marvelous research and publications that he did, finding photographs, some of which I've used here. And also Linda Barth, Bob is here somewhere. Linda Barth did 2 excellent books on the canal. So those have been great resources to me. So the greatest influence of the entire canal was on the Trenton region, not New Brunswick, not across all the agricultural areas, but in Trenton, because of the vast amount of economic and industrial activity that it promoted. So here's the 1914 canal map. Unlike the Morris Canal, which had to go through the mountains, the D&R Canal was very fortunate because it runs up right along the interaction between the New Jersey Piedmont, where the low hills start and eventually go into the mountains, and the inner coastal plain. So it had the advantage of going without having to go through inclined plains. Here is the feeder canal, which comes down from Bulls Island. Here is Lambertville. Here's Trenton. The lower branch, which we're going to look at today, comes all the way down here to Bordentown. And then this goes obviously to New Brunswick. There were 7 locks between Bordentown and Trenton. So here's Bordentown over here, 7 locks. This only shows 6 because around 1853 or so, the canal was widened and deepened, and they eliminated lock number 5 and they deepened lock number 4. So this only shows 6, but there were 7 of them. This is where State Street is in Trenton. So that is the summit of the portion of the canal that was the main canal. The portion that went up to Bulls Island was also navigable, but for much smaller boats. It was navigable because an outlet was provided, or an inlet was provided with a lock later on after the canal was built at Lambertville. So you could navigate that, but the purpose of that was really the feeder. So on the main portion of the canal, the summit of the canal, of course, the feeder up in Lambertville and there has a higher elevation, but the summit of the main portion of the canal is right here at lock number 7, which is where State Street currently crosses Route 1. Route 1 being in the canal bed. It's right next to the Trenton City Hall. And then it's 13 miles to Kingston from here, no locks up to Kingston, a lock at Kingston, and then 6 more locks down to New Brunswick. If I can read this map properly, this is only 60 feet from the summit in Trenton to where it goes out in Bordentown. And it was the same here. It was only about 60 feet higher because this is all downhill from here, all downhill. And so we're going to look at this very small portion from lock 4 to a little bit past lock 6, about here. We're going to look at about 1.25 miles of the canal. And it's the portion that was filled in by the WPA in the 30s. The lower portion of the canal, which we'll also see from lock 4 all the way down here, that's still there. I asked Bierce a few minutes ago, why are so many people interested in the Mars Canal? And she said, because it's ephemeral, because a lot of it's not there anymore. And people are fascinated with mystery. Whereas there's an awful lot of most of the D&R Canal is still in place, except for the short section between State Street and a little bit below Layler Street. So here's Bordentown, came out into Crosswicks Creek. Lock 2, 3, 4. 4 is at Layler Street, and then it went up here to State Street. And so we're only going to look at this small stretch right here, where the main activity was. So here it is in 1835, right after the canal opened, when this map was done. Here's the canal. And what we see here is a little tiny drawing of the Trenton State Prison, which was designed by John Haviland, who also designed the very famous one in Philadelphia, the Eastern State Penitentiary, and that opened in 1936. So it was under construction. And I haven't found evidence really because I haven't looked for it, but I'm pretty sure that all the stone, this entire construction was built out of stone, and a lot of it there. I think most of brownstone, and I think much of it came down the canal. There's a quarry at Goat Hill. There are other quarries along the Delaware by Baldpate. And in Ewing Township, there were also brownstone quarries. Here's some of the smaller boats coming down the feeder. So that was one of the early uses of the canal. So this is an interesting drawing because what we're going to see is in the beginning, the railroads, the canal was the dominant force of any kind of freight transportation because it was much cheaper to put something on a canal boat. The railroad was completed in 1839 next to the canal, but it was mostly used for passenger service in the beginning. And so over time, particularly after the Civil War, that equation flipped. So it went from the canal providing the freight to the railroad gradually taking over the freight and lessening the importance of the canal. And obviously it got to the point where this portion was completely cut off. It was completely filled. So here we are, 1849. Here we see the state prison. And here's the front of the state prison, a real monumental Egyptian revival structure. And over here, we see the first industries. We see Delaware Manufacturing Company. There's a basin. And here it says Fire Brick Works. And here it says Abbott's Coal Yard. So they're bringing coal down from Pennsylvania and they're bringing it into the basin and selling it. And over here, we have the beginning of the Roebling Works. Roebling moved from Saxonburg, where he started his wire rope business, to Trenton in 1848. And this map, 1849, shows the very beginning of Roebling. So here is the earliest illustration that we have of the Roebling Works. And this was done by Washington A. Roebling. He signed it right here, John's son. Washington did it in 1857, signed right here, dated right there. That was he graduated from RPI. His father, 2 years earlier, built this mansion right facing on State Street. And next to it, he built his first wire rope building. And in those days, it was very common for the factory owner to live right next to the factory. That was the standard model at the time. But you also used all the land as best as you could. You didn't leave it idle. So John Roebling had a garden here with meandering paths in the landscape garden tradition and had a kitchen garden. This is an orchard. And this is fields for growing wheat or some hay or something, because of course they had horses to move everything. And this is John Roebling's 1,500-foot long rope walk. And of course, here's the canal going across, and you can just barely see lock number 6. And this is South Broad Street. The Mercer County administration now occupies all these buildings or all the site. So here we are, 1860, and we're starting to see more on the canal. Roebling has grown here. Here's the Roebling Wire Rope Works. We have an axe factory over here. We have something called Locomotive Works, and we have the Trenton Iron Company, which was started by Peter Cooper. And, you know, one could give obviously many presentations on Peter Cooper and his contributions. And of course, he made rails for the Camden and Amboy Railroad. That was a very important part of their original work. And here we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 basins. And here is the, it's called the drain pipe manufacturing. So these are clay drain pipes, and here's Fire Brick Works. This is Chambersburg, which is all built up now, but you see the housing starting to fill in where because of all the factory jobs. And this railroad goes up, we'll see it again, goes up to Peter Cooper's other factory, which was actually on the Delaware. Next to the state prison, we have something called the State Arsenal. So things are starting to be built up here. So here's that locomotive works. This is called the locomotive works right here. I guess we're only going to see one of the basins. No, yes, we just see one of the basins. So this is Hamilton Avenue in Trenton and Chambersburg. And this started out as the American Locomotive Works. And this is a really interesting illustration because it has the basin here. It's got a lot of lumber piled up. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 schooners, canal boat. It's got a steamboat here, and it's got horses, and it's got a railroad with some small cars. As time goes on, the freight cars get bigger and bigger as the capacity of the railroad gets bigger and bigger to supply the factories, goes on at the same time. I think this is coal. This is right across the canal from the Roebling Works. So here we have Trenton in 1874, and this is the feeder canal coming down. They meet where Perry Street is now located, and then this canal goes up to Kingston, and here this goes down to Bordentown. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 basins. And we have the Trenton Iron Company here, which by this time took over the American Locomotive Works. And we have Roebling over here. And here's the state prison. So this is a close-up. So Trenton Iron was in the business of making wire. Peter Cooper made wire there. And when Roebling was looking to relocate, he wrote to Peter Cooper and asked him where was a good place to locate. Cooper said, across the canal from my factory is some open land, which Roebling bought and built his factory. Cooper thought he would supply wire to Roebling for Roebling's wire rope. But Roebling was very exacting and he wanted to draw his own wire. And so he didn't really buy much from Cooper. But Cooper, seeing how much wire rope was being made by Roebling, went into the wire rope business and made vast amounts of wire rope. So for over 100 years, these two companies were next to each other across the canal, competing in the business of wire rope. Trenton Iron eventually was taken over by the American Steel and Wire Company, which I'll talk about in a minute. Here's the Trenton State Prison. And you can see Chambersburg is starting to fill up with houses for the workers. So here's the Roebling factory that same year in 1874. Here's that same original building with the hip roof. Look how much it's grown from 1849 to 1874. This is a rolling mill. Here's Roebling's house, orchard over here, steamboat, and we have passenger, because most of the traffic on the Camden and Amboy Railroad at this time from Borden into Trenton was passenger traffic. It wasn't freight. And here is a canal boat, and you can barely see it. It goes off the image, but there's a line here. And so this is being towed up towards Trenton. So here across the river across the canal in 1883, here's Peter Cooper's Trenton Iron Works. This is where the Locomotive Works was originally. And so Cooper took that over, and this is now all Trenton Iron Works. We still have now all Trenton Iron Company. We still have passenger cars, but now it's the Pennsylvania Railroad. Because in 1871, is that right, Bill? 1871 was when the Pennsylvania Railroad leased the Camden and Amboy and the canal. And that was really the start, the decline, because the railroad was not really interested in the canal. But look at all the coal here. There's a coal here. Look at the coal here. this coal was being loaded off of boats, off the canal barges into the basin right there. So this is providing a vast amount of coal from the Pennsylvania coal fields, coal mines, to power all this industry that's growing up in Trenton. And it's growing in Trenton because Trenton is so well located. You can come up the Delaware River, or you can now take the canal to the Raritan River. And of course, there's railroads. So this is at the nexus, and it's right between the two biggest markets, Philadelphia and New York. So the economy is booming in Trenton. Here we are, 1890. Here's the Trenton Iron Company. And here, this is the canal here. This is one side of the Trenton Iron Company with Hamilton Avenue. See this one building here in pink? We're going to see that building later. Here's the canal basin. Over here, nobody can read this from where you are, but over here it says Delaware and Raritan Canal Lumber and Supplies Storage. So they actually had a facility here. And then this is the other side of Hamilton Avenue, where the other canal basin is. This shows the intensity. Look at all the rail lines now coming in here. And then across the street, we're starting to see, this is Roebling Works. This portion of the Roebling Works burned down, so it's not on this map. And what we see is also small businesses, Duncan McKenzie Sons. This is a foundry, and this is a small iron works. So there were all these little businesses that supplied the big factories. And these rail lines are now going into the factory. So instead of relying on basins to unload things, you have the cars, you can go right into the factory. That's a big change that signaled the decline of the canal. And here's where it says Delaware and Raritan Canal, Lumber and Supplies. This says gas powerhouse. So here we are with this 1898 drawing, and you can see it a little more close up. Here are the horses loading the reels and steam locomotives, but we also see the cars actually going into the factory. There's a locomotive. There's freight cars over here. So now when you can bring those cars right up to the front door of the building, you don't want to be unloading stuff from the canal, except bulk stuff like coal, but I believe that the coal may also have been brought by the railroad by this time. So here's 6. Here you see the rail going right into the factory. I'm not sure what this white is. Might be sand, lime. Yes, of course, because you use the lime in drawing wire. When you have a wire dye, you have to use the lime to lubricate the dye as you draw the wire through. And here we have big freight cars now. So we're no longer relying on these little freight cars. Now we're having bigger and bigger freight cars. And we're seeing fewer canal barges, and now we're seeing steamboats that are just going right through. And this is South Broad Street, one of the bridges. So here's a close-up. Coal. These are wire rope reels that are empty. So I have a feeling these customers are returning their reels because they're perfectly good to reuse. Here are very large reels of very, very heavy wire rope. So Roebling made vast amounts of wire rope for cable cars, including San Francisco cable cars. That was a gigantic business. And they're about 1.25 inches, I think, in diameter. And so that was a very huge production. And so these must be going on to the railroad, because how are you going to get these big reels over the rail to put them on a canal? And again, we have a big car there, big freight car. This is 1910. And this is a very interesting photo. This looks like wood over by the carpenter shop. There's two boys standing here that you can see. And here looks like it might be cobblestones or Belgian block, because the whole Roebling mill yard, all the area in between the factory was all laid with cobblestones. A lot of those, or Belgian block, a lot of those probably came right down the canal, because you had the trap rock quarries at Baldpate Mountain and also near Pleasant. Well, Baldpate Mountain is by Pleasant Valley Road. And here's a close-up of that. This is coal. And here are these two boys in looking at the scenery. This is Elmer Street here. And this is looking a little bit to the right. This might be more lime. Not sure what that is. Maybe this is gravel of some kind. Can't quite tell. A steamboat going by, no barges anymore, because we're relying on big freight cars. Iron ore. They didn't use iron ore here. Roebling later built a mill and they in Roebling, New Jersey, and they used iron ore there. So I'm not sure what that is. So across the street, around the same year, this is what was the Trenton Iron Company. This portion over here was that locomotive works we saw before. Now it was all Trenton Iron Company. In 1904, Cooper sold it to the American Steel and Wire Company in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was part of was called the Wire Trust, that was put together by John Gates. His name was John Bet a Million Gates, because he bet $1 million on something in those days. And he was kind of a front man for J.P. Morgan, because this was just at the time when railroads had peaked as an investment for Wall Street. 1896 was the peak of investor money going into the railroads, because railroads had been built everywhere where you could build one. And if I built a line here, 5 miles to the east, you got investors and you built another one. So now there's so much competition in the railroads that the investors aren't making enough money. And JP Morgan and others realized that steel was going to be the next big business. And so they created the US Steel Corporation in 1904, and they capitalized it at $1.4 billion. They tried to buy the Roebling factory from the Roebling brothers, and they offered the Roeblings about $10 million. So that gives you the idea of the scale, how big Roebling was compared to US Steel. When JP Morgan was assembling US Steel, he bought 40 companies, including Wire Rope Company, including American Steel and Wire Company, and merged them all into US Steel. And he wanted to buy Carnegie. And so the story goes that, and this was written, it was documented in one of the books about Morgan, that one of Morgan's representatives met Carnegie on a golf course in Westchester County and asked him if he would sell his steel company, Carnegie Steel. And Carnegie took out a piece of paper and wrote a number on it and handed it to Morgan's assistant. And that, after they were done, the assistant took the train down to Wall Street and went up to see Morgan. And the story goes, handed Morgan the piece of paper. And Morgan is reputedly to have looked at it and looked up at his assistant and said, "Tell him I'll buy it." And it was $450 million. That's how much money Carnegie had in I think it was 1904 when Morgan bought it from him. And Morgan realized it was so valuable because steel was the really next big product that was going to really take off for investment. There's this continue, I don't know how apocryphal this is, that Carnegie and Morgan met each other many months later somewhere. And Carnegie is supposed to have said, I think I got a good price for my steel company. And Morgan is reputed to have said, if you had asked for 100 million more, I would have given it to you. Now, think about owning a steel company and World War I comes along. And then skyscrapers come along. And, Schwab, who started Bethlehem, originally worked for Morgan at U.S. Steel, but he went and bought the little small Bethlehem company and built it in the competitor, not quite as big. But those two giant companies grew on all that steel from ships and bridges. The Peter Cooper Iron Works down on the river in Trenton, Delaware River, became New Jersey Steel and Wire Company, and then it became the American Bridge Company. And that was a division of U.S. Steel. So that just vast amount of work. So right down here, this is Hamilton Avenue, looking west towards Broad Street. This little building right here, we're going to see that building again. It's the 1876 wire mill. Put it in my pocket. So how else was the canal used? This is right by the bridge, by Broad Street. If we turn the camera to the right, it's going to be right in front of the entrance to the Roebling Works. All the Roebling Works here is on the right. This must be a Sunday or a holiday because the kids wouldn't all be out here if the trains were running. I can count 1, 2, 3 young women. They don't look old enough to be mothers. And there's one woman over here. I think that's a woman over there. And maybe that. So there's 5, and there's a young girl, 6 females. The rest are all males. This is a fender because the bridge is right over here. And so the fender provided a very good place to swim. So many people learned how to swim. When I interviewed some workers at Roebling, they would say, oh, we learned to swim in the canal. Now, one of the reasons all the factories lined up there was not only for the canal transportation originally, but also for water, because they drew all that Delaware water out of the canal for their manufacturing. And it all used a vast amount of water, all these places, especially the potteries. Roebling was reputed to be the biggest water user in the whole city of Trenton. Now, when you use your water in a facility like this, and then you have the industrial wastewater, where does it go? Back into the canal. So this swimming that occurred in the canal may not have been the healthiest place to go swimming. So over here in the back, we see the American Steel and Wire Company has really grown. And now it's got all of these buildings in the back. Hamilton Avenue, here's the canal. I'm sorry, the canal's over here. The Hamilton Avenue is right here. And so it's really expanded, and look at all the housing being built around it. Okay, 1890. Now this is a little bit further down the canal. So we have the state prison manufacturing shops, New Jersey State Arsenal. We have Mayor Arsenal Pottery. Over here we have Zink Works. And on the other side, we have Home Rubber Company. Home Rubber Company is the only business that's still operating. I don't know if it's still called home rubber, but there's still some kind of rubber extrusions of some kind being manufactured in the home rubber company building, which is pretty astounding. The only one of all these places that's still manufacturing. And over here we had the Buckthorn Fence Company, Roebling, and here we have two basins. Roebling quickly took over the Buckthorn Fence Company, and this came to be called the Roebling Lower Works. And again, we have the railroads going right in right next to the factory. You load it right on the car. You're not loading much out of the canal, although there's a barge here. There's one over here. We don't know what they're really, how much they're actually unloading. So within a few years now, this is the Roebling Lower Works. And on the opposite side of the canal, this is Layler Street, which is the end of the industrial area. Over here, we have the J.L. Mott Iron Works. J.L. Mott made cast iron plumbing fixtures. So cast iron bathtubs, cast iron sinks. And that was a very, very big business. Over here, we have Maddock Pottery. Here we have Trenton Fire, Clay, and Porcelain Company. Trenton Potteries, vast amount of employment going on here. This is the Mott Iron Works, J.L. Mott Iron Works. Look at the amount of employment here. And here's the railroad is coming right into it from the canal. Here's the canal over here. This is Layler Street, the end. And here it says Mott's Plumbing. This was a very, very big business. And this is what it looked like. This is probably 1926. And here is the Mott Potteries. Here's the Trenton Potteries. Over here, this is Stokely Van Camp. They made baked beans. Remember the baked beans? Over here, this was the Fire Brickworks. Roebling is way over here. This main Roebling factory is way over here. And here is, this is the Roebling Lower Works, where they made electrical wire. Roebling was very astute in that they were very smart to get out in front of new businesses as soon as they came along. Because just like we've seen in our lifetime, when Google comes along and builds a search business, nobody can catch up with them. So Roebling, a big part of their success was seeing new businesses come along. And one of those big ones was elevators. Another one was electrical wire. And another one was airplanes. Roebling, when the Wright brothers built their airplane in 1903, they used very small wire ropes made by Roebling because you controlled the rudder in the back with little wire ropes. And then they had diagonal wire ropes for the bracing. Well, the Roebling saw that and thought this is going to be a business. And they went into what they called aircraft wire. And that was a very big specialty business for them. So here's looking at it from the other direction. This is the bottom of Trenton, which is Layler Street. From here down, all the industrial work begins to fade away because we're going to get into the Trenton Marsh down here, Riverside Cemetery, where Roebling is buried. Here we have Lock 4. Here we have Lock 6. This is the Roebling factory. So all these buildings lined up here. Think thousands of people that work there. And look at all this housing that's now built here. All this housing is built up. People want to work in these row houses from in this era. It's just tremendous growth. Trenton went from 6,000 people in 1860 to 128,000 in 1930. Just vast amount of growth. So here we are in 1930. This is the Cass Street Bridge. The original iron bridge has been replaced. The original wooden bridge has been replaced with iron. This is the Roebling factory in the back. Remember all those smokestacks? belching black smoke and losing all that white steam. Now we have one boiler running that electrical generator and one smokestack running the entire plant. This is just about at the end of the canal. The last year was 33. Is that right, Bill? 33 was the last year they opened the canal. And this is just about at the end. This is looking north. Very interesting is that now there's a railroad on the other side, which I didn't see that on any of the earlier maps. So the normal railroad is on that side. So here is 1935. This is lock number 4, right below Layler Street. This is just before the canal got closed up here. And here we see all these kids along here swimming. So you can see the canal is not being used at this time. So you turn to the government for help, right?
Canal ends, you know what I mean? Did it go into the river or?
Yeah, we'll look at that.
Oh, okay.
The Dawn. I found this at the Jersey City Library. Very, very interesting WPA publication about all the works that the WPA was doing to put people to work. And one of them was canal filling, started today. And talks, here's Matt on front starting to fill the canal. They filled it from the feeder down to Layler Street because it was no longer being used for transportation. The Pennsylvania Railroad had stopped it. There was now enough city water that you could sell city municipal water. Trenton had built a big filtration plant. You could sell clean water now to the factories instead of them pulling dirty water out of the canal. So it was now redundant, and it was considered a nuisance in that area between the feeder canal and Layler Street. And here, unused and unsightly, a health menace in summer months. And so the city took over that stretch. It's about 2 1/3 miles from the state, because the state took over the D&R Canal when the Pennsylvania closed it. And they kept the feeder canal and kept the rest of the canal because they thought a use for it. And there was a plan, or there was an effort to have the canal become part of the intercoastal waterway, which is, I think, the only gap is from the Delaware River to, I guess there's some gap. I don't know exactly. Where does the Chesapeake Canal come in? To
Delaware City.
Delaware City. So the New Jersey and private citizens and businesses and the state wanted the federal government to take over the canal, and they were going to cut out all of the part, all this industrial part we were looking, the southern branch that we were looking at today. And they were going to have a shortcut of the canal that would bypass Trenton and connect up to Baker's Basin, where it would connect with the existing canal. But the federal government said that it saw no strategic value in having the canal and didn't want to do anything with it. So here's the WPA starting the canal filling. This is the former Trenton Armory. This is the former post office. That's now the federal courthouse in Trenton. And so this is State Street right there. So I think what we're looking at is a fender right after the aqueduct. There was an aqueduct to go over the Pennsylvania Railroad. And I think the aqueduct would have been right. So filling the canal.
But those gondola cars that are sitting there were full of dirt, and the laborers shoveled the dirt out of the gondolas into the canal.
1,000 men. One of the articles said, we're putting 1,000 men to work, you know, so there were two reasons to get rid of this menace because the city wanted to have a boulevard. They thought we'll turn that portion of the canal into a road so you can get from the middle of Trenton down to the bottom of Trenton where all those factories are. And so the second reason, of course, was putting people to work. So this is by John Bowie. So here we are. This is 1936. The city was talking about, you can't see it up here, but it says the WPA said canal to boulevard. That was the rallying call in the city of Trenton, canal to boulevard. That was 1936. 50 years later, took 50 years, the government put up the money to help New Jersey build Route 129. And as part of that, the state had to do archaeology. And they excavated lock number 6A. I think they call it 6A because it was modified from the original 6 lock. And John Bowie, some of you may know who John Bowie is, really superb engineer and architectural engineering draftsman, did this drawing. So that previous illustration, the fender right here, I think the fender is just off here. Bill's nodding his head. So and then here is the canal that John drew. And here's the excavation in 1988 for the building of 129. And this is obviously not an original portion of the canal, a later portion. And over here, John did this really excellent drawing showing how it worked with the miter gates on both sides. And here are the miter gates that they found at the bottom when they were taking out all the dirt that the WPA put in. So now back to this image where we see, this is 1935, I think, where we see Lock 4, and this is Stokely Van Camp. Here it is on Monday, this past week. Stokely Van Camp is now senior citizen housing. And look at the traffic on here. 129 is like zoom, zoom, zoom. So the canal turned out to be brilliantly located in terms of transportation, even though the water transportation is long gone. Look at this transportation corridor that now fills it in. And so that picture I took from right here. Here's Stokely Van Camp, senior housing. This is the buildings that remain from the Mott Ironworks. This one has been turned into self-storage. This one's vacant, and this one is a nursing home. This is the former Roebling Works that is now state offices. A developer bought it. This is the lower portion of the Roebling Works. It's now state offices. Here's the state prison, which we'll see in a minute. The main Roebling Works is up here. A lot less employment. A lot less employment. A lot of the space is now taken up by cars. You know, we're no longer making much here except for right there is Home Rubber Company. See the old looking building with the old chimney still there. This is the original state prison from 1836 when this was finished. It's, I don't know, but it would be kind of shocking if prisoners are still in these cell blocks. I mean, seriously, if anybody has been to the Eastern State Prison, you know what those 19th century cell blocks look like. But they're still there, and they have this brownstone wall all around it, all made of brownstone brought down on the canal from the feeder. And this is all new prison over here. And now we have more parking lots. And then this is up at the Roebling portion, and this is all the Trenton Iron Company. Again, parking lots. We have a Mercer County Arena. And over here, we have several of the Roebling buildings that have been converted to new uses. But a vast amount, big parking, a lot less unemployment, a lot less of an economic engine for the city of Trenton, because something like the arena is not a taxpayer. Remember that little building that I talked about, the 1876 Trenton Iron Company wire mill? The only building surviving from the Trenton Iron Company, 1876. It's really a marvelous building. It's got this beautiful Victorian brickwork on the top. And Mercer County, I should say, one man, there were a lot of people pressing the county because the county bought this building. There were a lot of people pressing the county to save the building, and the county wanted to demolish it. And one man who was a freeholder got up at the freeholder board and made a compelling speech. His name is Brian Hughes. He's now the county executive, and he's the son of Governor Richard Hughes. And he saved that building politically. And he was backed up by a lot of preservation people, including me. This is looking on the opposite side. And here we see Roebling Lofts apartments in the former Elmer Street rope shop. This upper floors, this 4-story building, this is where they made the air cord for airplanes, because you need very wire rope because the air cord is small. It's bigger than a pen. Up until the most recent airplanes that are being built, including jet planes, a pilot told me that only now are the new jet planes not using air cord. That any airplane, and any of us actually who are flying on airplanes today, you know, you're flying on a 30-year-old airplane most of the time. They have the regular hydraulic system to run everything, but they have a backup wire rope system in case the hydraulic goes down. That's no longer the case, but up until present time. So Roebling, because there were small machines built, had all the machinery up there. This is a very pleasing marriage of technology and preservation. And I'm sure a number of people here can cite examples elsewhere in New Jersey, particularly in urban areas. This water tower was put in 1918 because there were big fires here. And this building is the first one that Charles Roebling built with a sprinkler system. Before that, there were no sprinkler systems. You can imagine wire rope and grease and oil all over the place. Very flammable. So they built this up here because they needed 15,000 gallons of water up here for the gravity to be able to run the sprinklers. Now, there's a big pipe in the middle. And what they did was they had a loop, and they would heat the water at the bottom so it wouldn't freeze. They heated probably only to about 40 degrees, maybe slightly more. And then they would pump it up to the top. So all winter long, the water kept getting changed so it wouldn't freeze. So normally, so these were replaced when the city water pressure got strong enough that you could now run off the city municipal water. And they became redundant. And of course, they look pretty dangerous, right? Way up there. So along came what that saved these? What?
Cell towers.
Cell towers. Look at all those transponders. So the people that build cell towers, they come into your neighborhood and say, I want to build a cell tower. And everybody says, no, no, no. But they figured out that they could repurpose these, even though it's not cheap. It's a lot cheaper than trying to put up a new cell tower. So if you go down here, the original room to the behind the train here is still there in place where they had the pump system, says 1918 on it. And right next to it is a small, it looks like a container from a ship, all full of all the cell phone stuff. So, you know, I think it's a great it's a great use of technology to preserve an otherwise useless industrial artifact. And transportation corridor, the river line, which goes from Trenton all the way to Trenton. So that rail line, we saw all these rail cars, freight cars, passenger cars. It was opened in 1839, still being used after all these years. So I could show more examples of Roebling and other buildings being reused, but then we're getting into, architectural history and reuse. So I figured we'd better, get back to canals. So this is Bordentown. Bill had this image in his, I think probably both of his books on the canal. So here's the outlet in Bordentown of the canal. Here's lock number 1 right here. And this is Crosswicks Creek. Now, 295 has been built on the other side. And I think there's a vast amount of landfill over here because the canal is no longer as close to the Delaware River. This is the toll collector's house right here. And these were stables on the other side. So this is what it looks like now. This is the outlet. And the lock is still there. So I am not an expert on locks, or I know very little about locks, and probably some people could come up here like Bill. Go ahead.
That lock, we believe, is the only surviving 100% wood lock that was actually built as a floating vessel, moved into a dredged trench, and then sunk by loading up the compartments on the side of the lock with rock. So it is a very special lock. The original lock was built about 400 feet to the east of that, and it's all marshy land, and it broke. The original lock broke up. This one stayed is at high. We used to be able to go in there with a, in fact, Canal Society did, but then they built a walkway across, which does not allow you to get under it with a boat.
I'm glad I took this picture. So for those people who are watching the Zoom, Bill McKelvey just said that this is the oldest surviving wooden lock, or the only wooden lock, right, on the Delaware and Raritan Canal. Now, you said this was a replacement. When was this built?
Maybe 20 years after the original lock.
So around 1850, when they did the canal widening and deepening. So and you said that, well, let's look at, there's that bridge that you were talking about, that it's a pedestrian bridge just for because this is all now part of the state park. There's the entrance right there. And this photo I took standing on the bridge on last Thursday, a week ago, Thursday. And here is the construction that you're talking about. And I had no idea that you're saying, so this is looking towards Crosswick Creek.
Yeah, the yacht club is right where your finger is.
Exactly. And this is now looking upstream. Now, you said that they built this separately on land somewhere and then they floated it?
Floated it in place and then sank it in a dredged trench.
They sank it. I'm just repeating what you're saying for the audience who's watching the Zoom. They built it and sank it in a dredged trench and then backfilled with dirt. Look at how well it's held up. 1850. What kind of wood would this be?
Well, it's wood that has been kept wet. Yeah. The wood above that, which gets dried and put away, but the lower wood that's kept wet with the tide, that does not rot away.
Do you have any idea? Is it hemlock?
Probably oak.
Oak. So it would probably be white oak. Okay. There's part of I think that's part of the miter gate, isn't it?
looks like the heel post, yes.
And over here, so this is where the gate,
That's where the gate laid back against the wall of the lock, yes.
that was recessed. I was kind of astounded to see that that's still in place, but now you've made it more interesting that I had no idea that they would have built this and then floated it and put it in. That explains why it has held up so well, because by building it on land, they could build it much better than if they were laying one piece after another into the muck. So there it is. So if that's it's hard to believe that that's from 1850, but maybe that might have been replaced. But anyway, you can see bolts, and look at these cross ones going back, all the way back, like a log cabin. So the portion of the canal that we looked at from that ended at Layler Street, in other words, it was filled in from the junction of the feeder and the main canal. The junction is at Perry Street in Trenton. It was filled from there to Layler. Layler is up here, and the rest of this is all still there. The WPA never filled it in. And you can go and walk or bicycle down here, and Bill must have gone all the way down there.
I was interested in doing it. It was all overgrown. You really couldn't get through there. I think they've cleared a path now, but I'm too old to do that kind of hiking now.
There's your path. So this is looking south towards that lock. So this is obviously one of the towpath on the west side. Now it's a trail, and the gravel is quite well maintained. It was there on an old sort of damp day. There were people walking. You can bike all the way down there. And here is what used to be the Camden and Amboy Railroad and is now the River Line, the light rail river line. So the transportation function still continues, and the excavation, and obviously it's filling in. And over here, you can just see these green signs from Route 295, which sort of parallels this a little bit to the east. So there it is looking north. And if we went all the way up here, we'd come to Layler Street. Do you want?
Because you had the falls of the Delaware at Trenton, and they wanted to get below the falls down to the top, deeper tidewater level of the Delaware River at Bordentown.
Deeper tidewater is why it went all the way down there, because I read that the fluctuation in the height of the water up by the falls was very high, whereas even a mile or two, maybe it's 2 or 3 miles further south by Crosswicks Creek, the fluctuation in the tide is a lot lower than it was. So that's why they brought it all the way down here. Any other questions, thoughts?
Do we have a minute or two? I'd like to go back to the Cass Street photo that you had with the towpath on it, and also the cement block. Those two things, that was the cement block.
Okay. Oh, wait.
This is the cement lock immediately south of the Northeast Corridor, the original 4-track main line of the Pennsylvania Railroad. This lock was built like 2 years before the canal was abandoned. Had to build it because they needed to raise the aqueduct by 3 feet so they could put the catenary in on the Pennsylvania Railroad main line in that year. That's right. So that necessitated the new lock there just south of the aqueduct. And then they raised the banks of the D&R Canal all the way up to the next lock. But this restored the D&R Canal to 7 locks. Originally, it had 7. They combined 2 and it made it 6. This brought it back to 7. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. Now, the Cass Street, if you could go back to where the towpath was on the one side. No, you're going. Yeah, one couple more back. One more. That's it. On the left side is the track that the Pennsylvania Railroad put in. They put in a new bridge across the canal just south of Layler Street and ran this siding up all along on the original towpath of the D&R Canal to access all the industries that they could since the canal was going to be shortly abandoned. At this point, Cass Street carried the fast line trolley cars from Newark into Trenton. Their access was by Cass Street, and also the cars that went from Trenton to Camden came across this street as well. The Newark cars had a standard gauge of 4'8.5". The Camden cars had a 5'2" gauge. The crossing, the trolley, it was a double diamond, dual gauge trolley / railroad crossing was there in the street until they were building the new Route 129. Some of our trolley enthusiasts ran across it. And of course, I got the phone call, hey, you got to save this. So I went down and looked at it and says, yes, we have to save it. So this was about 30 years ago. We went down, the Conrail people or the track people had saved it, put it aside. It was 10 feet wide. I says, I can't take it. It's got to be 8 feet. So they cut 1 foot off each side of all 12 off all 6 trolley tracks, 1 foot of rail, so that we could get it on the. We got down there. They brought over a big front end loader. Couldn't lift it. It still had the cobblestones in 2 of the diamonds in the center. So the contractor said, "Oh, not a problem, not a problem." He says, "I got a big loader, a backhoe, and which was tracked. I mean, this was a monstrous machine." So he goes up 2 blocks, cranks it up, brings it down. He says, "Okay," and he lifted it. He put it on the truck. The truck was a 3-axle truck and the rear was a tilt bed. When he dropped it on the truck, he just put it about 2 feet too far to the back. And I was following him on the way back up to Peaburg. And every time he came to a curve, he had to really slow down because the truck wanted to go in a straight direction because there wasn't enough weight on the front wheels to make the turn. But we finally got it up to Phillipsburg, and he raised up. Now it had the ties under it and the cones and all that rail. And we raised up the bed of the truck, and it just stayed there. I says, "What are you going to do now?" He says, "Watch this." He gets in and he revs up the engine in low gear and pops the clutch. The whole truck shuddered, and this crossing slid off and landed on the land. That's 30 years ago. About 2 years ago, they were building a new engine shop for the Belvedere Delaware Railroad at Phillipsburg, and they came across it. Of course, they called me up and says, "What is it?" I told them what it is. "Oh, wow, we got to save it." What they did with that, they put that in an active track, which is now called the towpath track at Lehigh Junction, right adjacent to the Morris Canal. So they have taken this crossing from one section of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was a towpath, and brought it to another prior section of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was near the towpath of the Morris Canal. It is now installed and they can operate over it. They haven't had the ribbon cutting yet. They're still working on the wordage of the signage, but that's going to happen. Now, while I have your attention, there was a local trolley system. There are 4 different gauges of trolley car lines in Trenton. The biggest line was the Trenton Transit. They had like 300 trolley cars. About 5-6 years ago, we found one of those surviving trolley cars that was actually in a building. We paid a contractor to carefully demolish the building to get the trolley car out. And we have saved the body from that car. It's a basket case, but it's the only trolley that remains from a passenger trolley that remains from Trenton. We just signed last week a $200,000 contract to begin the work of restoration. We hired a very competent cabinet maker because it's made up of like Tinker Toys, all little teeny pieces of wood that are shaped and fitted in and routed and whatnot. And we are confident that we're going to restore that car. Okay, I've said enough. Thank you.
Bill, where did you find the car?
They called me on the phone and said we found it.
In Trenton?
Yes, at Ewing Township, actually.
In Ewing.
Very near the Trenton Hamilton station.
Okay, and where is it now?
It's in Farmingdale. We lease the railroad siding behind a factory, and it's a secure location, good fencing, and good patrolling.
And how old do you think the car is?
Now you're going 1914 or 16, somewhere around there.
Great. Well, that'll be nice to keep track of the restoration.
I had some postcards. There's a couple of postcards of it out on the counter.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments? Well, thank you very much for the honor to come and speak about the D&R Canal here. Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. Great presentation. You can see me there. Jeff, how many people are joining us online?
About 45.
45 people online. Wow. Very cool. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been great, and you made it great. So we will do this again. We'll get the chairs organized first, though. We're going to open up the office space and the archives again for those who came late, who didn't get a chance to see. Please talk to Bobby Egan. Thank Janice, who made this happen. Talk to John about archives. Thank you for coming, and hope that I'll see you again. And remember, Byram, Morris Canal History Day. Did I get it right, Frank? Pretty good. Absolutely. Thank you all.